Hello and welcome back, future Grandmasters. Today we're going to be looking at a match between Edward Pindar and Joseph Blackburne. Now, many of you may have heard Joseph Blackburne's name before. He was one of the strongest players in the late 1800s, had many great finishes and many great wins against the top players at the time. Edward Pindar is a bit less well known. So, this match takes place in the year 1862. Now, this is somewhat early in Blackburne's career. At the time, Blackburne had joined the Manchester Chess Club, and Edward Pindar was sort of the top player at that club. Now, they had played a series of matches, three matches in total, between 1861 to 1862. Initially, in the first matchup, Edward Pindar won 5-0, so completely destroyed Blackburne. And now this is from match three in 1862. And at this point, this is a match that is won by Blackburne. And Blackburne went on after this to have a great career in chess, whereas Pindar went on. Well, Pindar was a school teacher, and at some point he started hitting on one of his students and asked his student to marry him. She said no, and he violently assaulted her and ended up going to prison for 5 years. And after that, after he got released from prison, he didn't play too much chess. So he kind of went into obscurity. Okay, so today's matchup is one of the biggest chokes I've seen from the 1800s. So there's actually 2 points in the match where white is completely winning. And you're going to see and hopefully not feel so bad about choking positions in your own games after seeing how Pindar is recorded in the history books as having lost this match. So let's get started. E4, E5. It opens up as a Spanish game, very popular in the 1800s, a very popular and top-level chess to this day. We have a Spanish, A6, very commonly seen line. This is pretty much the most commonly seen line. Nowadays, of course, castling is the main line. However, Pindar plays something that is known as the Mackenzie variation. Now, this was much more popular in the 1800s. It's not as popular nowadays because if you learn a little bit of theory, you can kind of get out completely equal as black. So the top line, I mean, there's many options that look good. Of course, the knight captures, pawn captures, b5 are all possible, but there's one move that is significantly better than the others. We don't want to allow white to have the strong two pawns in the center, and so we capture. Okay, now white can immediately recapture, but the top line is to simply castle. Nowadays, there's one concrete way to play this, which is bishop to e7, which is essentially giving away this pawn and acknowledging that we're probably going to be relatively equal in this game. So black is quite happy to be playing an equal game already on the eighth move. However, what was commonly played in the 1800s is, Blackburne figures I'm going to move this bishop. I might as well move it somewhere where it's going to do something useful, like defend my pawn. So black plays here. And now, of course, ultimately this pawn will be lost. I mean, first of all, the bishop can eliminate the knight. That's one of the defenders. Now the queen is defending. So, but ultimately, white is going to be able to break through the center. And at this point, black plays e5, capturing more of the center for himself. Now, knight to g4 is commonly played nowadays, although knight d5, it's technically a minor inaccuracy, but I think it's quite a natural move. The bishop attacks this knight. Now, it's very easy. At this point already, white is better and black is almost in an only move position. So this knight is under attack. There's a couple of different places that the knight can be moved, although this looks scary because the knight can be trapped after a3. Knight b6 looks very passive. So a lot of people would play knight back to e7 here. Because the knight is near the king, it seems like a fair move. However, already white is much better after this line, and then if black tries to castle to get out of trouble, suddenly queen h5, and now this is just completely losing here. So already black is in a very uncomfortable position, and luckily black finds the only continuing move, which is moving this knight to defend this knight. Now, white immediately strikes with a pin, basically pinning the defending piece to my queen. So now this knight is sort of hanging again. Now, a lot of different ways to address this. We can try to retreat this knight. Not many pieces can defend, however, the knight. So retreating it seems natural. Although the simplest move actually totally works, and that would be h6. Kicking the bishop out, because, well, if the bishop takes the knight, we recapture the knight, that's totally fine. And then if this knight is captured, well, we have this bishop, and this is also, again, very good for black. So h6 is definitely the move to play. However, black simply retreats the knight, and already this knight is a little misplaced. There's not many squares for the knight to move. White is, again, quite comfortable here. Now, after knight b to d2, there are a few key ideas here. h6 is still very strong, trying to remove the bishop's pin on the knight. Castling also is a move. However, d5 is played, which I think is a little nerve-wracking, because after the pawn captures, suddenly our king isn't still not castled, and yet, well, now we have no choice, we have to recapture, and now our king is sort of very vulnerable to white's pieces coming in, and it's white's turn. Now, a very natural move here is to simply castle out of danger, which is the correct idea. Now, of course, black will lose a pawn, right? So the knight can capture, and then either the knight or the queen can capture our pawn on d4. And that's already positionally still much worse for black. However, black's next move just completely allows white to dominate the game, which is c5. Defending the center, but clearly the priority in this position is not to stabilize our center, it's to get our king to safety by castling. c5 is just completely losing. It's already almost +4 for white. After the move rook e1, black is in huge trouble now. There's a very concrete tactic here, which is that knight captures the bishop, queen captures the bishop, and now there's two attackers on our knight. So at this point, black can just resign. Black also cannot castle. Black is lined up with the rook. The queen's under attack. This is totally lost. So castling also does not solve our problem, because also, yet again, we'll simply lose a piece. And also this is a fork. So the only way here to move forward is to not allow the knight capturing the bishop to open up this line. So we forcibly block it by placing something there. So we place our bishop here to sort of contest white's bishop. Now white captures, totally fine. Pawn captures. And now what white had to do here was sort of counter on the flank and attack the base of our pawn chain, because white can pretty comfortably just keep sitting with his pieces like this, staring at black's position. It's like in a UFC match when the UFC fighter is just sitting on top of the opponent, just in full mount, and just not even hitting them, just sitting on them. this is how it feels. Like black has very, very little counterplay here. So something like b4, and already this is a fork that would fork these two pieces. Black has massive, massive issues in this position. So, however, white decided to go queen e2, which is an okay move. I mean, it's logical. It lines up two strong battery ram pieces on the line of the weak pawn and my king. However, there's one move that for black that is clearly a strong move, and that's simply castling. Castling is played. Now, of course, this does allow, if the knight captures, for instance, for the queen to take the pawn with check on the king. However, we can then exchange queens, and it would be a pretty drawn game. So white wants to avoid allowing us to liquidate, right? So technically, black is up a pawn, and so white needs to look for a way in order to at least regain some material. For instance, knight captures the pawn, then we can takes with check, king escapes, we lose here. This is a fork on all three of these, so we take, and then, well, let's say take. And now this is just completely winning for white because white is up a pawn. White is about to win another pawn because these two pawns are under attack and we can't defend both of them. And white's pieces are just far more active, and white's pawn structure is much better. This should be a comfortable endgame that white will win. However, white was too hasty and just simply liquidated. But as we see, after all of these pieces come off, now, well, black is pretty equal. I mean, it looks like black's in a little bit of trouble because two of the knights are under attack by the rook, but there's a lot of different ways to defend. We can defend this way, we can defend this way, or even the best way, kind of hard move to spot, but just forcibly blocking this line with the knight. So we obstruct the rook's view on the undefended knight. Okay. So, well, black plays the more natural move. That's okay. The rooks double up, preventing our rook from coming in on this line. Now, the top move here is to simply displace this bishop with h6. Creating luft, removing the bishop from, impacting these squares. However, Blackburne saw a different idea. So these three pawns are weak in white's position. So in order to attack one of the pawns, he moves knight to a4. Knight to a4 is attacking this. Now, the computer gives some suggestion, like to try to attack this way. And now c5 is going to fall. However, white doesn't see that and instead just immediately plays b3, which of course is exactly what Blackburne wants, and he gets his knight into a nice square, a nice outpost. White's pawn on a2 is under attack, so white develops the pawn. And now it's black's turn again, and black has some decisions. So, again, h6 is very natural, very strong move. Other than that, we of course can move our central pawns. G6 does nothing, and we don't really want to move the B pawn either. So A5 is a natural move. It's kind of a tough one to spot in this position, but it's very nicely played. White simply retreats. We're not too concerned about this exchange because we'll just bring our other knight in. Now, following along with a5, a4 is a very strong battery ram. You know, we have the rook behind the pawn. We can play a4, and now, well, if this is ignored, of course, we're going to end up winning a pawn here. So white has to capture, for instance. But now these pawns are split, and this pawn is most likely going to fall at some point. So, however, for some reason, Blackburne retreats the knight. I'm not too sure why, because this knight was well defended by the other knight. I guess Blackburne wanted to attack this pawn, but there's a very natural a4 here, which just evicts that knight. So, white throws in this rook move before a4. Now, this rook is attacking this undefended knight, but also on the same line as the undefended pawn. So if this knight moves or this knight moves and we get an exchange, well, this pawn is going to fall. So we need to defend our knight in a way with one of our available rooks. Now, this rook seems well placed behind our pawn, so we're going to move the other one. That's the top move. Bishop attacks the rook. And, well, it's easy. I think a lot of people might instinctively play the rook up to here. But now, after the following liquidation, this is actually quite good for white. So there's a tactical idea here, which is that this rook is blocked by his own rook, can't move to either of these squares, and then black's pawns cover the following squares, and black's knights cover the following squares. So actually this rook is completely trapped. So rather than moving this rook, we move the knight, and now after an exchange of rooks, again, white has many options because there's two hanging knights. However, white's bishop is also hanging. White retreats the bishop. Now, white's idea was that we have two knights under attack. So if we, for instance, try defending one of the other, the bishop takes the weak pawn. Hold on. So in that scenario, it would be in the scenario that we move this one, we can then take, and then the rook is also attacking c5. So takes, now bishop moves here, so there's no way to defend sort of the two knights as well as the weak pawn, so we simply exchange the bishop. And now not too many good squares here as for the knight, so knight to c6 is very natural. We sort of stop the rook from coming into here, so knight c6. Knight e5 is a sort of weird move from white because, well, white's knight is quite strong, black's is quite weak, and ultimately, if these knights come off, black, the number of pawns is equal. However, black has these two connected sort of deep pawns here. So, of course, the knights are exchanged. And black has a decision here, right? So b6 is natural, rook c8 is natural, right? We need to do something about this weak pawn. However, the computer's top move is a4 with a very deep line, exploiting this weak back rank mate. So white has to sort of make some space, and now white is actually up a pawn. However, this is just going to be a draw ultimately. So instead, rook to c8 is played, totally natural move, king f1. Okay. So black has to continue defending this pawn. Now, even already, the sort of mysterious c4 is good because if it's taken, then suddenly this pawn is quite weak and we can have a huge liquidation here. So c4 works. However, king f7 is totally natural. King e2, so getting the king in the center, totally fine. Here, a couple different ideas are all good. b6, king f6, totally fine. Rook to c6 is a little mysterious, but I think the idea is to be able to attack sort of the weak pawns here if he prefers. Or, I mean, at this point, lining them up is quite weak. The king and rook are lined up, but removing the rooks is probably just going to be a draw. So king goes to d3. And now we see white's plan. White wants to mount additional pressure onto white's pawn chain base. Now, already we're sort of in an only move situation. We have to sort of solidify the pawn chain. However, white continues marching, and what's going to happen next is king b5, which is going to leave this rook stuck on the 6th rank, defending the pawn's base, the pawn chain base. So rook goes here. This is okay. I don't think that's an inaccuracy. Black just wants to prevent the king from entering here. King is going to enter from the other side. Probably the king should have just immediately entered. f4 is played. And now this is a minor inaccuracy just because there's an interesting line, right? So we have a king and a weak pawn on the same file, so on the same rank. So we clear this pawn and then fork. King c3, and now this is now black's much more active here. So black doesn't see that and instead goes after the weak pawns. So this can be easily addressed by h3. And now we kind of do our dance with the rook. We run it back here, targeting this weakness. Now, if g4 is played, we can run it back, targeting this weakness. And actually, white cannot go back and defend. So b5, the king b5 forces our rook to stay here. Although we can still exchange, d3, and then there's going to be a deep liquidation here. So the rook dance is stopped by the rook retreating to the second rank, defending two of white's weaknesses, leaving only these as sort of minor weaknesses in the position. And now this is very drawish. It looks like the rook is going to be stuck babysitting here. The king can't really go anywhere. This is probably just going to come out as a draw. And at this point, black should play one of the only moves that make sense of position, right? So we're stuck from moving any pawns. So we simply play h5 here. And now sort of wait to see what happens with the position. It's going to hopefully resolve as a draw. Now, black plays a total blunder. I can't begin to explain why Blackburne decided to exchange rooks. Of course, white correctly immediately exchanges rooks, and now this is just totally lost. This is actually so trivially losing that this is already resignable because, well, white is already too close to the pawn chain base. White is 2 steps away from defending it, whereas white is only 1 step away. So we have a 3-on-2 over here. So white is dominating on both the left and the right side of the board. And we have no pawn pushes because this is covered. So white plays g4, totally fine. Now, actually, black has completely no moves. Every single move from black is completely losing here. Doesn't matter what you do. So if black goes to this side, well, then simply these pawns are gonna overwhelm and create a queen on this side. If black tries to go this way, well, white is simply gonna start eating every pawn. So h5. There's no wrong move really here. Honestly, white can just ignore it and start his march here. However, so that is what is played. This pawn is under attack. Now we can either advance or we could take it. Not really any difference. So black takes, white takes. Now this is an even simpler clarification of the position. We have a 2-on-1, which is guaranteed to promote if the king isn't there. So if our king ever comes to the queen side here to defend these pawns are going to rush and promote. And if we attempt to sort of circulate and attack these pawns, well, by then we'll have lost all of our pawns here and a pawn will have promoted. So now, really, again, as black, there's completely no hope here. There's no pawn pushes that can be played. So black just moves the king. Now, this is pretty much the most legendary choke of all time. At least as far as the 1800s go, this is horrible. So white is guaranteed to win. White has a 2-on-1 here, and we know that the king is already stepped away from there. So one good line is to simply push any one of these pawns. Even this is given a question mark. Ignore that. It's completely winning. Starting to march the 2-on-1 is good. Now we know that this pawn stops this promotion. This pawn stops this from moving up. And so it would seem that at this point, white is good to take here. However, white needs to be very accurate and ensure that every single one of black's pawn pushes is covered. So black can't push this pawn, or if he does, it's completely losing. These we've already covered are completely blocked. These ones completely lose a pawn. The king is blocking this, so there's only one pawn push left, which is a4. So in the easiest way to prevent a4 is to just simply block it yourself with a4. So white needs to play a4, and then really doesn't matter at all. Now our king is too far away, and now there's no way to stop both frets. It's just completely impossible. If we attempt to sort of go here, this is way, way, way too slow. So at this position, in a completely winning endgame, white captured on b6. And as you saw, the eval bar is +9 for black. There's only one move in the position that even can be possibly considered. a4. And a4 is completely winning. Now, if white takes, well, now we have 2-on-1, and we're going to overwhelm and create a queen. If white does not take, we're going to capture, and then with the recapture, this is going to become a passer. Actually, there's no move for white. If white attempts to push here, well, we can either just create our 2-on-1 by pushing this, or we can just capture and promote this way. So the pawn is captured, and now we have a 2-on-1. However, white himself is also only 4 spaces away. So, of course, we're not going to push here. We lose immediately. So we push our pawn, c4, and now d3. Either one can be played, push or, forward or capture. Doesn't make too much difference, but capturing is totally fine. Pawn is pushed, pawn is pushed, pawn is pushed, queen, queen. Now, looking at this, it can maybe even look like white is winning because there's a queens on the board and white has 3 pawns, black has 1. However, it's all about who has the initiative, who has the tempo. So these kings are staring at each other. So white can force the king back with queen b3, check. Now already we can very lazily win the game by doing this. Takes, king d5. The king is just way too far away. There's simply no way for white to get here in time. And black is going to win this in like another 20 moves. So, however, I really like the finish here. Blackburne shows true master level class here. Plays what seems like an almost confusing move, queen to a4, so ignoring this pawn on a3. Now, of course, white has to keep the queen defended, so the next move is forced. And now the important point was to keep the queen on this diagonal, the white diagonal. Now, a few important things to point out. There are a few interesting checks. So, for instance, check here, this is mate. So if we check here, only this move can be played. But now we kind of are repeating moves, and already this is a draw, actually. So with a very precise, so after check, king here, we can play queen to b5. After queen to b5, we have only, king c8 leads to the same checkmate. So only after this check can this check be played. And now this is one of the coldest moves that can be played in chess. A quiet king move, king c7. So we choke white's king on the corner of the board, and even though it's white's turn, white has no way to check our king. Any of these checks just lose the queen on the spot, and any sort of check on here immediately loses the queen after this. So a very nice finish, an unbelievable comeback from Blackburne. Again, I guess the moral of the story is don't resign. Always play it out until the end. You never know. Even against a strong player, sometimes, at the end of the game, they let their guard down. And yeah, hopefully this makes you feel better about some of the losses that you've had in winning endgames as well. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope everyone has a great 2026, and I hope best wishes for your elo for this year. Let me know in the comments how your progress has been going so far this year. All right, till next time. Bye bye.